Appendix A, a brief chronicle of the Third Age of Middle-earth. Only 3 of Isildur's people came ever back over the mountains after long wandering, and of these one was Oltar his esquire, to whose keeping he had given the shards of the sword of Elendil. Thus Narsil came in due time to the hand of Elendil, Isildur's heir, in Imladris, but the blade was broken and its light was extinguished, and it was not forged anew. And Master Elrond foretold that this would not be done until the ruling ring should be found again and Sauron should return, but the hope of elves and men was that these things might never come to pass. Valandil took up his abode in Numenor, but his folk were diminished, and of the Numenorians and of the men of Eriador there remained now too few to people the land or to maintain all the places that Elendil had built, in Dagorlad and in Mordor, and upon the Gladden fields many had fallen. And it came to pass after the days of Earendor, 640 to 861 of the Third Age, the 7th king that followed Valandil, that the men of Western Essie, the Dunedain of the north, became divided into petty realms and lordships, and their foes devoured them one by one. Ever they dwindled with the years, until their glory passed, leaving only green mounds in the grass. At length naught was left of them but a strange people wandering secretly in the wild, and other men knew not their homes nor the purpose of their journeys, and save in Imladris, in the house of Elrond, their ancestry was forgotten. Yet the shards of the sword were cherished during many lives of men by the heirs of Isildur, and their line from father to son remained unbroken. In the south the realm of Gondor endured, and for a time its splendor grew, until it recalled the wealth and majesty of Numenor ere it fell. High towers the people of Gondor built, and strong places and havens of many ships, and the winged crown of the kings of men was held in awe by people of many lands and tongues. For many a year the white tree grew before the king's house in Minas Anor, the seed of that tree which Isildur brought out of the deeps of the sea from Numenor, and the seed before that came from Avalone, and before that from Valinor in the day before days when the world was young. Yet at the last, in the wearing of the swift years of Middle-earth, Gondor waned, and the line of Meneldil, son of Anarion, failed. For the blood of the Numenorians became much mingled with that of other men, and their power and wisdom was diminished, and their lifespan was shortened, and the watch upon Mordor slumbered. And in the days of Telomnar, ruled 1634 to 36 of the Third Age, the 3rd and 20th of the line of Meneldil, a plague came upon dark winds out of the east, and it smote the king and his children, and many of the people of Gondor perished. Then the forts on the borders of Mordor were deserted, and Minas Ithil was emptied of its people, and evil entered again into the black lands secretly, and the ashes of Gogoroth were stirred as by a cold wind, for dark shapes gathered there. It is said that these were indeed the Ulari, whom Sauron called the Nazgul, the 9-ring race, that had long remained hidden, but returned now to prepare the ways of their master, for he had begun to grow again. And in the days of Earnil, 1945 to 2043 of the Third Age, they made their first stroke, and they came by night out of Mordor over the passes of the mountains of shadow, and took Minas Ithil for their abode, and they made it a place of such dread that none dared to look upon it. Thereafter it was called Minas Morgul, the Tower of Sorcery, and Minas Morgul was ever at war with Minas Anor in the west. Then Osgiliath, which in the waning of the people had long been deserted, became a place of ruins and a city of ghosts. But Minas Anor endured, and it was named anew Minas Tirith, the Tower of Guard, for there the kings caused to be built in the citadel a white tower, very tall and fair, and its eye was upon many lands. Proud still and strong was that city, and in it the white tree still flowered for a while before the house of the kings, and there the remnant of the Numenorians still defended the passage of the river against the terrors of Minas Morgul, and against all the enemies of the west, orcs and monsters and evil men, and thus the lands behind them west of Anduin were protected from war and destruction. Still Minas Tirith endured after the days of Eärnur, 2043 to 2050 of the Third Age, son of Eärnur, and the last king of Gondor. He it was that rode alone to the gates of Minas Morgul to meet the challenge of the Morgul Lord, and he met him in single combat. But he was betrayed by the Nazgul and taken alive into the city of torment, and no living man saw him ever again. Now Eärnur left no heir, but when the line of the kings failed, the stewards of the house of Mardil, the faithful, ruled the city and its ever-shrinking realm, and the Rohirrim, the horsemen of the north, came and dwelt in the green land of Rohan, which before was named Calanardon, and was a part of the kingdom of Gondor, and the Rohirrim aided the lords of the city in their wars. And northward, beyond the falls of Rhoros and the gates of Argonath, were as yet other defenses, powers more ancient, of which men knew little, against whom the things of evil did not dare to move, until in the ripening of time their dark lord Sauron should come forth again. And until that time was come, never again after the days of Eärnur did the Nazgul dare to cross the river or to come forth from their city in shape visible to men. In all the days of the Third Age, after the fall of Gil-galad, Master Elrond abode in Imladris, and he gathered there many elves and other folk of wisdom and power from among all the kindreds of Middle-earth, and he preserved through many lives of men the memory of all that had been fair. And the house of Elrond was a refuge for the weary and the oppressed, and a treasury of good counsel and wise lore. In that house were harbored the heirs of Isildur in childhood and old age, because of the kinship of their blood with Elrond himself, and because he knew in his wisdom that one should come of their line to whom a great part was appointed in the last deeds of that age. And until that time came the shards of Elendil's sword, were given into the keeping of Elrond, when the days of the Dunedain darkened and they became a wandering people. In Eriador, Imladris was the chief dwelling of the High Elves, but at the Grey Havens of Lindon there abode also a remnant of the people of Gil-galad the Elven King. At times they would wander into the lands of Eriador, but for the most part they dwelt near the shores of the sea, building and tending the elven ships wherein those of the firstborn who grew weary of the world set sail into the uttermost west. Círdan the shipwright was lord of the havens and mighty among the wise. Of the 3 rings that the elves had preserved unsullied, no open word was ever spoken among the wise, and few even of the Eldar knew where they were bestowed. Yet after the fall of Sauron their power was ever at work, and where they abode their mirth also dwelt, and all things were unstained by the griefs of time. Therefore ere the Third Age was ended, the elves perceived that the ring of sapphire was with Elrond in the fair valley of Rivendell, upon whose house the stars of heaven most brightly shone, whereas the ring of adamant was in the land of Lorien, where dwelt the Lady Galadriel. A queen she was of the woodland elves, the wife of Celeborn of Doriath, yet she herself was of the Noldor, and remembered the day before days in Valinor, and she was the mightiest and fairest of all the elves that remained in Middle-earth. But the red ring remained hidden until the end, and none save Elrond and Galadriel and Círdan knew to whom it had been committed. Thus it was that in 2 domains the bliss and beauty of the elves remained still undiminished while that age endured, in Imladris and in Lothlorien, the hidden land between Celeborn and Anduin, where the trees bore flowers of gold and no orc or evil thing dared ever come. Yet many voices were heard among the elves foreboding that, if Sauron should come again, then either he would find the ruling ring that was lost, or at the best his enemies would discover it and destroy it. But in either chance the powers of the 3 must then fail, and all things maintained by them must fade, and so the elves should pass into the twilight and the dominion of men begin. In that time the Noldor walked still in the hitherlands, mightiest and fairest of the children of the world, and their tongues were still heard by mortal ears. Many things of beauty and wonder remained on earth in that time, and many things also of evil and dread. Orcs there were, and trolls and dragons and fell beasts, and strange creatures old and wise in the woods whose names are forgotten, dwarves still labored in the hills and wrought with patient craft works of metal and stone that none now can rival. But the dominion of men was preparing and all things were changing until at last the Dark Lord arose in Mirkwood again. Now of old the name of that forest was Greenwood the Great, and its wide halls and aisles were the haunt of many beasts and of birds of bright song, and there was the realm of King Thranduil under the oak and the beech. But after many years, when well nigh a third of that age of the world had passed, a darkness crept slowly through the wood from the southward, and fear walked there in shadowy glades. Fell beasts came hunting, and cruel and evil creatures laid there their snares. Then the name of the forest was changed, and Mirkwood it was called, for the nightshade lay deep there, and few dared to pass through, save only in the north where Thranduil's people still held the evil at bay. Whence it came, few could tell, and it was long ere even the wise could discover it. It was the shadow of Sauron and the sign of his return. For coming out of the wastes of the east, he took up his abode in the south of the forest, and slowly he grew and took shape there again. In a dark hill he made his dwelling and wrought there his sorcery, and all folk feared the sorcerer of Dol Guldur, and yet they knew not at first how great was their peril. Even as the first shadows were felt in Mirkwood, there appeared in the west of Middle-earth the Istari, whom men called the Wizards. None knew at that time whence they were, save Círdan of the Havens, and only to Elrond and to Galadriel did he reveal that they came over the sea. But afterwards it was said among the elves that they were messengers sent by the lords of the west to contest the power of Sauron, if he should arise again, and to move elves and men and all living things of goodwill to valiant deeds. In the likeness of men they appeared, old but vigorous, and they changed little with the years, and aged but slowly, though great cares lay on them. Great wisdom they had, and many powers of mind and hand. Long they journeyed far and wide among elves and men, and held converse also with beasts and with birds, and the peoples of Middle-earth gave to them many names, for their true names they did not reveal. Chief among them were those whom the elves called Mithrandir and Cúrnir, but men in the north named Gandalf and Saruman. Of these, Cúrnir was the eldest and came first, and after him came Mithrandir and Radagast and others of the Istari, who went into the east of Middle-earth, and do not come into these tales. Radagast was the friend of all beasts and birds, but Cúrnir went most among men, and he was subtle in speech and skilled in all the devices of smithcraft. Mithrandir was closest in council with Elrond and the elves. He wandered far in the north and west and made never in any land any lasting abode, but Cúrnir journeyed into the east, and when he returned he dwelt at Orthanc in the ring of Isengard, which the Numenorians made in the days of their power. Ever most vigilant was Mithrandir, and he it was that most doubted the darkness in Mirkwood, for though many deemed that it was wrought by the ring-wraiths, he feared that it was indeed the first shadow of Sauron returning, and he went to Dol Guldur, and the sorcerer fled from him, and there was a watchful peace for a long while. But at length the shadow returned, and its power increased, and in that time was first made the Council of the Wise, that is called the White Council, and therein were Elrond and Galadriel and Círdan and other lords of the Eldar, and with them were Mithrandir and Cúrnir. And Cúrnir, that was Saruman the White, was chosen to be their chief, for he had most studied the devices of Sauron of old. Galadriel indeed had wished that Mithrandir should be the head of the council, and Saruman begrudged him that, for his pride and desire of mastery was grown great. But Mithrandir refused the office, since he would have no ties and no allegiance, save to those who sent him, and he would abide in no place nor be subject to any summons. But Saruman now began to study the lore of the rings of power, their making and their history. Now the shadow grew ever greater, and the hearts of Elrond and Mithrandir darkened. Therefore on a time Mithrandir, at great peril, went again to Dol Guldur in the pits of the sorcerer, and he discovered the truth of his fears and escaped. And returning to Elrond, he said, "True, alas, is our guess. This is not one of the Ulari, as many have long supposed, It is Sauron himself who has taken shape again, and now grows apace, and he is gathering again all the rings to his hand, and he seeks ever for news of the One and of the heirs of Isildur, if they live still on earth. And Elrond answered, In the hour that Isildur took the ring and would not surrender it, his doom was wrought, that Sauron should return. Yet the One was lost, said Mithrandir, and while it still lies hid, we can master the enemy if we gather our strength and tarry not too long. And the White Council was summoned, and Mithrandir urged them to swift deeds, but Cúnir spoke against him, and counseled them to wait yet and to watch. For I believe not, said he, that the One will ever be found again in Middle-earth. Into Anduin it fell, and long ago, I deem, it was rolled to the sea. There it shall lie until the end, when all this world is broken and the deeps are removed. Therefore naught was done at that time, though Elrond's heart misgave him, and he said to Mithrandir, Nonetheless I forebode that the One will yet be found, and then word will arise again, and in that word this age will be ended. Indeed, in a second darkness it will end, unless some strange chance deliver us that my eyes cannot see. Many are the strange chances of the world, said Mithrandir, and help oft shall come from the hands of the weak when the wise falter. Thus the wise were troubled, but none as yet perceived that Cúnir had turned to dark thoughts and was already a traitor in heart. For he desired that he and no other should find the great ring, so that he might wield it himself and order all the world to his will. Too long he had studied the ways of Sauron and hoped to defeat him, and now he envied him as a rival rather than hated his works. And he deemed that the ring, which was Sauron's, would seek for its master as he became manifest once more, but if he were driven out again, then it would lie hid. Therefore he was willing to play with peril and let Sauron be for a time, hoping by his craft to forestall both his friends and the enemy when the ring should appear. He set a watch upon the Gladden fields, but soon he discovered that the servants of Dol Guldur were searching all the ways of the river in that region. Then he perceived that Sauron also had learned of the manner of Isildur's end, and he grew afraid and withdrew to Isengard and fortified it, and ever he probed deeper into the lore of the rings of power and the art of their forging. But he spoke of none of this to the council, hoping still that he might be the first to hear news of the ring. He gathered a great host of spies, and many of these were birds, for Radagast lent him his aid, divining naught of his treachery, and deeming that this was but part of the watch upon the enemy. But ever the shadow in Mirkwood grew deeper, and to Dol Guldur evil things repaired out of all the dark places of the world, and they were united again under one will, and their malice was directed against the elves and the survivors of Numenor. Therefore at last the council was again summoned, and the lore of the rings was much debated, but Mithrandir spoke to the council, saying, It is not needed that the ring should be found, for while it abides on earth and is not unmade, still the power that it holds will live, and Sauron will grow and have hope. The might of the elves and the elf friends is less now than of old. Soon he will be too strong for you, even without the great ring, for he rules the 9, and of the 7 he has recovered 3. We must strike. To this Cúnir now assented, desiring that Sauron should be thrust from Dol Guldur, which was nigh to the river, and should have leisure to search there no longer. Therefore, for the last time, he aided the council, and they put forth their strength, and they assailed Dol Guldur and dropped Sauron from his hold, and Mirkwood for a brief while was made wholesome again. But their stroke was too late, for the Dark Lord had foreseen it, and he had long prepared all his movements, and the Ulari, his 9 servants, had gone before him to make ready for his coming. Therefore his flight was but a feint, and he soon returned, and ere the wise could prevent him, he re-entered his kingdom in Mordor, and reared once again the dark towers of Barad-dûr. And in that year the White Council met for the last time, and Cúnir withdrew to Isengard, and took counsel with none save himself. Orcs were mustering, and far to the east and the south the wild peoples were arming. Then in the midst of gathering fear and a rumor of war, the foreboding of Elrond was proved true, and the One Ring was indeed found again, by a chance more strange than even Mithrandir had foreseen, and it was hidden from Cúrnir and from Sauron, for it had been taken from Anduin long ere they sought for it, being found by one of the small fisherfolk that dwelt by the river, where the kings failed in Gondor, and by its finder it was brought beyond search into dark hidings under the root of the mountains. There it dwelt until, even in the year of the assault upon Dol Guldur, it was found again by a wayfarer, fleeing into the depths of the earth from the pursuit of the orcs, and passed into a far distant country, even to the land of the Perianeth, the little people, the halflings who dwelt in the west of Eriador. And ere that day they had been held of small account by elves and by men, and neither Sauron nor any of the wise save Mithrandir had in all their councils given thought to them. Now by fortune and his vigilance, Mithrandir first learned of the ring, ere Sauron had news of it, yet he was dismayed and in doubt. For too great was the evil power of this thing for any of the wise to wield, unless like Cúrnir he wished himself to become a tyrant and a dark lord in his turn. But neither could it be concealed from Sauron forever, nor could it be amazed by the craft of the elves. Therefore, with the help of the Dunedain of the north, Mithrandir set a watch upon the land of the Perianeth and bided his time. But Sauron had many years, and soon he heard rumor of the One Ring, which above all things he desired, and he sent forth the Nazgul to take it. The word was kindled, and in battle with Sauron the Third Age ended even as it had begun. The tale continues in The Lord of the Rings. Appendix B. The Numenorian chapters from The Lost Road. Within the manuscripts of JRR Tolkien's unfinished novel, The Lost Road, begun some time prior to 1937, there are many foreshadowings of themes later realized in his writings concerning the fall of Numenor. In the second chapter there is a verse, in translation from Anglo-Saxon, which clearly describes places akin to the lands of Numenor and the Blessed Realm and the yearning of men for the West. There is many a thing in the West regions unknown to men, marvels and strange beings, a land fair and lovely, the homeland of the elves and the bliss of the gods. Little doth any man know what longing is his whom old age cutteth off from return. And elsewhere appear the names Numenor, Sauron, Morgoth, Melko, Melkor, and Earendel, Earendil. The many-layered time-travel device is complex and was, doubtless, the reason for the novel being abandoned, proving, as Tolkien was to later express it, too long a way round to what I really wanted to make, a new version of the Atlantis legend. When, in 1987, Christopher Tolkien published the surviving elements of his father's manuscript in The Lost Road and other writings, he singled out what he referred to as the Numenorian chapters as a discrete section to be given appropriate prominence and consideration of the text. Whilst not easily incorporated into the chronological form used in this volume, these chapters merit inclusion here by virtue of their containing a masterly summary of the First Age, the creation of Numenor, the rise of Sauron and the coming of the Shadow, presented as a Socratic dialogue richly embellished in Tolkien's most majestic and epic style. In terms of where in the chronology it might be notionally located, it would seem to sit most easily at that point in the Akallabeth, where Ar-Pharazôn is promulgating his plans for assaulting the Blessed Realm in Amandil. The loyal counselor to the king has left his home in Romena and set sail into the west in order to appeal to the Valar for assistance, leaving his son Elendil waiting and looking for his father's return. In this version, it is Arontor, not Amandil, who has embarked on that mission. Elendil's son is here named Herendil, as opposed to Tolkien's later choice of Isildur, while Elendil himself is said to be the son of Valandil rather than Amandil, Tolkien later giving the name Valandil to the youngest of Isildur's sons. Ar-Pharazôn is here referred to as Tar-Kalion, an earlier iteration of his Numenorian name, Tar-Kalion. The Numenorian chapters. Christopher Tolkien provides the following introduction. My father said in his letter of 1964, on the subject that in my tale we were to come at last to Amandil and Elendil, leaders of the loyal party in Numenor, when it fell under the domination of Sauron. It is nonetheless plain that he did not reach this conception until after the extant narrative had been mostly written, or even brought to the point where it was abandoned. At the end of Chapter 2, the Numenorian story is obviously just about to begin, and the Numenorian chapters were originally numbered continuously with the opening ones. On the other hand, the decision to postpone Numenor and make it the conclusion and climax to the book had already been taken when the Lost Road went to Allen and Unwin in November 1937. Since the Numenorian episode was left unfinished, this is a convenient point to mention an interesting note that my father presumably wrote while it was in progress. This says that when the first adventure, i.e. Numenor, is over, Alboin is still precisely in his chair and Alduin just shutting the door. This refers to the foregoing chapters as published in The Lost Road and other writings. With the postponement of Numenor, the chapter numbers were changed, but this has no importance and I therefore number these 3 and 4. They have no titles. In this case, I have found it most convenient to annotate the text by numbered notes. Chapter 3. Elendil was walking in his garden, but not to look upon its beauty in the evening light. He was troubled, and his mind was turned inward. His house with its white tower and golden roof glowed behind him in the sunset, but his eyes were on the path before his feet. He was going down to the shore to bathe in the blue pools of the cove beyond his garden's end, as was his custom at this hour, and he looked also to find his son Herendil there. The time had come when he must speak to him. He came at length to the great hedge of lavaralda that fenced the garden at its lower western end. It was a familiar sight, though the ears could not dim its beauty. It was 7/12 of years or more since he had planted it himself when planting his garden before his marriage, and he had blessed his good fortune. For the seeds had come from Ersea far westward, whence ships came seldom already in those days, and now they came no more. But the spirit of that blessed land and its fair people remained still in the trees that had grown from those seeds. Their long green leaves were golden on the undersides, and as a breeze off the water stirred them, they whispered with the sound of many soft voices and glistened like sunbeams on rippling waves. The flowers were pale with a yellow flush, and lay thickly on the branches like a sunlit snow, and their odor filled all the lower garden faint but clear. Mariners in the old days said that the scent of lavaralda could be felt on the air long ere the land of Ersea could be seen, and that it brought a desire of rest and great content. He had seen the trees in flower day after day, for they rested from flowering only at rare intervals. But now suddenly as he passed, the scent struck him with a keen fragrance, at once known and utterly strange. He seemed for a moment never to have smelled it before. It pierced the troubles of his mind, bewildering, bringing no familiar content, but a new disquiet. Ersea, Ersea, he said. I wish I were there and had not been fated to dwell in Numenor halfway between the worlds, and least of all in these days of perplexity. He passed under an arch of shining leaves and walked swiftly down rock-hewn steps to the white beach. Elendil looked about him, but he could not see his son. A picture rose in his mind of Herendil's white body, strong and beautiful upon the threshold of early manhood, cleaving the water or lying on the sand glistening in the sun. But Herendil was not there, and the beach seemed oddly empty. Elendil stood and surveyed the cup and its rocky walls once more, and as he looked, his eyes rose by chance to his own house among trees and flowers upon the slopes above the shore, white and golden, shining in the sunset. And he stopped and gazed, for suddenly the house stood there, as a thing at once real and visionary, as a thing in some other time and story, beautiful, beloved, but strange, a waking desire, as if it were part of a mystery that was still hidden. He could not interpret the feeling. He sighed. I suppose it is the thread of word that maketh me look upon fair things with such disquiet, he thought. The shadow of fear is between us and the sun, and all things look as if they were already lost, yet they are strangely beautiful, the scene. I do not know. I wonder. A Numenor. I hope the trees will blossom on your hills in years to come as they do now, and your towers will stand white in the moon and yellow in the sun. I wish it were not hope, but assurance, the assurance we used to have before the shadow. But where's Herondale? I must see him and speak to him more clearly than we have spoken yet. It is too late. The time is getting short. Herondale, he called, and his voice echoed along the hollow shore above the soft sound of the light falling waves. Herondale. And even as he called, he seemed to hear his own voice, and to mark that it was strong and curiously melodious. Herondale, he called again. At length there was an answering call. A young voice, very clear, came from some distance away, like a bell out of a deep cave. Manier, Otto, Manier. For a brief moment it seemed to Elendil that the words were strange. Manier, Otto, what is it, father? Then the feeling passed. Where art thou? Here. I cannot see thee. I am upon the wall looking down on thee. Elendil looked up and then swiftly climbed another flight of stone steps at the northern end of the cove. He came out upon a flat space smoothed and leveled on the top of the projecting spur of rock. Here there was room to lie in the sun or sit upon a wide stone seat with its back against the cliff, down the face of which there fell a cascade of trailing stems rich with garlands of blue and silver flowers. Flat upon a stone, with his chin in his hands, lay a youth. He was looking out to sea, and did not turn his head as his father came up and sat down on the seat. Of what art thou dreaming, Herondale, that thy ears hear not? I am thinking. I am not dreaming. I am a child no longer. I know thou art not, said Elendil, and for that reason I wish to find thee and speak with thee. Thou art so often out and away, and so seldom at home these days. He looked down on the white body before him. It was dear to him and beautiful. Herondale was naked, for he had been diving from the high point, being a daring diver and proud of his skill. It seemed suddenly to Elendil that the lad had grown overnight, almost out of knowledge. How doth thou grow? He said. Thou hast the makings of a mighty man, and have nearly fished the making. Why dost thou mock me? Said the boy. Thou knowest I am dark and smaller than most others of my year, and that is a trouble to me. I stand barely to the shoulder of Almariel, whose hair is of shining gold, and she is a maiden and of my own age. We hold that we are of the blood of kings, but I tell thee thy friend's sons make a jest of me and call me Terendal, slender and dark, and they say I have Arisan blood, or that I am half Nodal. But that is not set with love in these days. It is but a step from being called half a gnome to being called God-fearing, and that is dangerous. Elendil sighed. Then it must have become perilous to be the son of him that is named Elendil, for that leads to Valendil, God-friend, who is thy father's father. There was a silence. At length, Herondale spoke again. Of whom dost thou say that our king Tarkalion is descended? From Arundel, the mariner, son of Tor the mighty, who was lost in these seas. Why then may not the king do as Arundel, from whom he is come? They say that he should follow him and complete his work. What dost thou think that they mean? Whither should he go and fulfill what work? Thou knowest. Did not Arundel voyage to the uttermost west and set foot in that land that is forbidden to us? He doth not die, or so songs say. What callest thou death? He did not return. He forsook all whom he loved ere he stepped on that shore. He saved his kindred by losing them. Were the gods wroth with him? Who knoweth? For he came not back. But he did not dare that deed to serve Malco, but to defeat him, to free men from Malco, not from the lords, to win us the earth, not the land of the lords. And the lords heard his prayer and arose against Malco, and the earth is ours. They say now that the tale was altered by the Arsans, who are slaves of the lords, that in truth Arundel was an adventurer and showed us the way, and that the lords took him captive for that reason, and his work is perforce unfinished. Therefore the son of Arundel our king should complete it. They wish to do what has been long left undone. What is that? Thou knowest, to set foot in the far west and not withdraw it. To conquer new realms for our race and ease the pressure of this peopled island, where every road is trodden hard and every tree and grass blade counted, to be free and masters of the world, to escape the shadow of sameness and of ending. We would make our king lord of the west, Narun Numenoran. Death comes here slow and seldom, yet it cometh. The land is only a cage, gilded to look like paradise. Yeah, so I've heard others say, said Elendil. But what knowest thou of paradise? Behold, our wandering words have come unguided to the point of my purpose, but I am grieved to find thy mood is of this sort, though I feared it might be so. Thou art my only son and my dearest child, and I would have us at one in all our choices. But choose we must, thou as well as I, for at thy last birthday thou became subject to arms and the king's service. We must choose between Sauron and the lords, or one higher. Thou knowest, I suppose, that all hearts in Numenor are not drawn to Sauron? Yes, there are fools even in Numenor, said Herondale in a lowered voice. But why speak of such things in this open place? Do you wish to bring evil on me? I bring no evil, said Elendil. That is thrust upon us, but the choice between evils, the first fruits of war. But look, Herondale, our house is one of wisdom and guarded learning, and was long revered for it. I followed my father as I was able. Dost thou follow me? What dost thou know of the history of the world or Numenor? Thou art but 4/12, and wert but a small child when Sauron came. Thou dost not understand what days were like before then. Thou canst not choose in ignorance. But others of greater age and knowledge than mine, or thine, have chosen, said Herondale, and they say that history confirmeth them, and that Sauron has thrown a new light on history. Sauron knoweth history, all history. Sauron knoweth, verily, but he twisteth knowledge. Sauron is a liar. Growing anger caused Elendil to raise his voice as he spoke. The words rang out as a challenge. Thou art mad, said his son, turning at last up on his side and facing Elendil with dread and fear in his eyes. Do not say such things to me. They might. Who are they? And what might they do? Said Elendil, but a chill fear passed from his son's eyes to his own heart. Do not ask, and do not speak so loud. Herondale turned away and lay prone with his face buried in his hands. Thou knowest it is dangerous to us all. Whatever he be, Sauron is mighty and hath ears. Fear the dungeons, and I love thee. Atarnia Melane. My father, I love thee. The words sounded strange but sweet. They smote Elendil's heart. Ionia Inye Temela, and I too, my son, I love thee, he said, feeling each syllable strange but vivid as he spoke it. But let us go within. It is too late to bathe. The sun is all but gone. It is bright there westwards, in the gardens of the gods. But twilight and the dark are coming here, and the dark is no longer wholesome in this land. Let us go home. I must tell and ask thee much this evening behind closed doors, where maybe thou wilt feel safer. He looked toward the sea, which he loved, longing to bathe his body in it, as though to wash away weariness and care. But night was coming. The sun had dipped and was fast sinking in the sea. There was fire upon far waves, but it faded almost as it was kindled. A chill wind came suddenly out of the west, ruffling the yellow water offshore. Up over the fire-lit rimmed dark clouds reared. They stretched out great wings south and north, and seemed to threaten the land. Elendil shivered. Behold, the eagles of the Lord of the West are coming, a threat to Numenor, he murmured. What dost thou say? Said Herondale. Is it not decreed that the king of Numenor shall be called Lord of the West? "It is decreed by the king, but that does not make it so," answered Elendil. "But I meant not to speak aloud. My heart is foreboding. Let us go." The light was fading swiftly as they passed up the paths of the garden amid flowers, pale and luminous in the twilight. The trees were shedding sweet night scents. A Lomelinde began its thrilling bird song by a pool. Above them rose the house. Its white walls gleamed as if moonlight was imprisoned in their substance, but there was no moon yet, only a cool light, diffused and shadowless. Through the clear sky, like fragile glass, small stars stabbed through white flames. A voice from a high window came falling down like silver into the pool of twilight where they walked. Elendil knew the voice. It was the voice of Firiel, a maiden of his household, daughter of Arontor. His heart sank, for Firiel was dwelling in his house because Arontor had departed. Men said he was on a long voyage. Others said that he had fled the displeasure of the king. Elendil knew that he was on a mission from which he might never return, or return too late. And he loved Arontor. Firiel was fair. Now her voice sang an even song in the Erasan tongue, but made by men long ago. The nightingale ceased. Elendil stood still to listen, and the words came to him, far off and strange as a melody in archaic speech sung sadly in a forgotten twilight in the beginning of man's journey in the world. Iluvatar, Enkare Eldine, Firimoin, Antarotar, Monarch Valion, Messier. The Father made the world for elves and mortals, and he gave it to the hands of the lords who are in the west. So sang Firiel on high until her voice fell sadly to the question with which that song ends. Monter and Taba nin Iluvatar, Henare tar Inyakoluva, what will Iluvatar give me in that day beyond the end, when my son faileth? Amen on Tavaru, what will he give indeed? Said Elendil, and stood in somber thought. She should not sing that song out of a window, said Herndil, breaking the silence. They sing it otherwise now. Malco cometh back, they say, and the king shall give us the sun forever. I know what they say, said Elendil. Do not say to thy father, nor in his house. He passed in at a dark door, and Herndil, shrugging his shoulders, followed him. Chapter 4. Herndil lay on the floor, stretched at his father's feet upon a carpet woven in a design of golden birds and twining plants with blue flowers. His head was propped upon his hands. His father sat upon his carved chair, his hands laid motionless upon either arm of it, his eyes looking into the fire that burned bright upon the hearth. It was not cold, but the fire that was named the heart of the house, Amerin, burned ever in that room. It was moreover a protection against the night, which already men had begun to fear. But cool air came in through the window, sweet and flower-scented. Through it could be seen, beyond the dark spires of still trees, the western ocean, silver under the moon, that was now swiftly following the sun to the gardens of the gods. In the night silence, Elendil's words fell softly. As he spoke, he listened as if to another that told a tale long forgotten. There is Iluvatar, the one, and there are the powers of whom the eldest in the thought of Iluvatar was Alcar the Radiant, and there are the firstborn of earth, the Eldar who perish not while the world lasts. And there are also the afterborn mortal men, who are the children of Iluvatar, and yet under the rule of the lords. Iluvatar designed the world and revealed his design to the powers, and of these some he said to be Valar, lords of the world and governors of the things that are therein. But Alcar, who had journeyed alone in the void before the world, seeking to be free, desired the world to be a kingdom unto himself. Therefore he descended into it like a falling fire, and he made war upon the lords his brethren. But they established their mansions in the west, in Valinor, and shut him out. And they gave battle to him in the north, and they bound him, and the world had peace and grew exceeding fair. After a great age, it came to pass that Alcar sued for pardon, and he made submission unto Manwë, lord of the powers, and was set free. But he plotted against his brethren, and he deceived the firstborn that dwelt in Valinor, so that many rebelled and were exiled from the blessed realm. And Alcar destroyed the lights of Valinor and fled into the night. And he became a spirit dark and terrible and was called Morgoth, and he established his dominion in Middle-earth. But the Valar made the moon for the firstborn and the sun for men, to confound the darkness of the enemy. And in that time, at the rising of the sun, the afterborn, who are men, came forth in the east of the world, but they fell under the shadow of the enemy. In those days the exiles of the firstborn made war upon Morgoth, and 3 houses of the fathers of men were joined unto the firstborn, the house of Beor, and the house of Haleth, and the house of Hador. For these houses were not subject to Morgoth, but Morgoth had the victory and brought all to ruin. Earendel was son of Tor, son of Hor, son of Gunlin, son of Hador. And his mother was of the firstborn, daughter of Turgon, last king of the exiles. He set forth upon the great sea, and he came at last unto the realm of the lords, and the mountains of the west. And he renounced there all whom he loved, his wife and his child, and all his kindred, whether of the firstborn of men, and he stripped himself. And he surrendered himself unto Manwë, lord of the west, and he made submission and supplication to him. And he was taken and came never again among men. But the lords had pity, and they sent forth their power, and war was renewed in the north, and the earth was broken, but Morgoth was overthrown. And the lords put him forth into the void without. And they recalled the exiles of the firstborn, and pardoned them, and such as returned dwell since in bliss in Erisea, the lonely isle, which is Avalon, for it is within sight of Valinor and the light of the blessed realm. And for the men of the 3 houses, they made Vinya, the new land, west of Middle-earth in the midst of the great sea, and named it Andor, the land of gifts. And they endowed the land, and all that lived thereon with good beyond other lands of mortals. But in Middle-earth dwelt lesser men, who knew not the lords, nor the firstborn save by rumor, and among them were some who had served Morgoth of old, and were accursed. And there were evil things also upon earth made by Morgoth in the days of his dominion, demons, and dragons, and mockeries of the creatures of Iluvatar. And there too lay hid many of his servants, spirits of evil, whom his will governed still, though his presence was not among them. And of these Sauron was the chief, and his power grew. Wherefore the lot of men in Middle-earth was evil, for the firstborn that remained among them faded, or departed into the west, and their kindred, the men of Numenor, were afar, and came only to their coasts in ships that crossed the great sea. But Sauron learned of the ships of Andor, and he feared them, lest free men should become lords of Middle-earth, and deliver their kindred, and moved by the will of Morgoth, he plotted to destroy Andor, and ruin, if he might, Avalon and Valinor. But why should we be deceived and become the tools of his will? It was not he, but Manwë the fair, lord of the west, that endowed us with our riches. Our wisdom cometh from the Lord, and from the firstborn that see them face to face, and we have grown to be higher and greater than others of our race, those who served Morgoth of old. We have knowledge, power, and life stronger than they. We are not yet fallen, wherefore the dominion of the world is ours, or shall be, from Erisea to the east. More can no mortals have. Save to escape from death, said Earendel, lifting his face to his fathers, and from sameness. They say that Valinor, where the lords dwell, has no further bounds. They say not truly, for all things in the world have an end, since the world itself is bounded, that it may not be void. But death is not decreed by the lords. It is a gift of the one, and a gift which in the wearing of time even the lords of the west shall envy. So the wise of old have said, and though we can perhaps no longer understand that word, at least we have wisdom enough to know that we cannot escape unless to a worse fate. But the decree that we of Numenor shall not set foot upon the shores of the immortal or walk in their land, that is only a decree of Manwë and his brethren. Why should we not? The air there giveth enduring life, they say. Maybe it doth, said Elendil, and maybe it is. But the air which those need who already have enduring life, to us perhaps it is death or madness. But why should we not say it? The Erisans Go thither, and ye are mariners in the old days used to sojourn in Ersea without hurt. The Erseans are not as we. They have not the gift of death. But what doth it profit to debate the governance of the world? All certainty is lost. Is it not sung that the earth was made for us, but we cannot unmake it? And if we like it not, we may remember that we shall leave it. Do not the firstborn call us the guests? See what the spirit of unquiet has already wrought. Here, when I was young, there was no evil of mine. Death came late and without utter pain and weariness. From our sands we obtained so many things of beauty that our land became well nigh as fair as theirs, and may be fairer to mortal hearts. It is said that of the lords themselves will walk at times in the gardens that we named for them. There we set their images fashioned by air sands, who have beheld them as the pictures of friends beloved. There were no temples in this land, but on the mountain we spoke to the one who hath no image. It was a holy place, untouched by mortal art. Then Sauron came. We had long heard rumor of him from seamen returned from the east. The tales differed. Some said he was a king greater than the king of Numenor, some said he was one of the powers, or their offspring said to govern Middle-earth. A few reported that he was an evil spirit. Perchance Morgoth returned, but at these we laughed. It seemed that rumors came also to him of us. It is not many years, 3 12s and 8, but it seems many since he came hither. Thou wert a small child, and knew not then what was happening in the east of this land, far from our western house. Tarkalion, the king, was moved by rumors of Sauron, and sent forth a mission to discover what truth was in the mariners' tales. Many counselors dissuaded him. My father told me, and he was one of them, that those who were wisest and had most knowledge of the west had messages from the lords warning them to beware. For the Lord said that Sauron would work evil, but he would not come hither unless he were summoned. Tarkalion was grown proud, and brooked no power in Middle-earth greater than his own. Therefore the ships were sent, and Sauron was summoned to do homage. Guards were set at the haven of Morionde, in the east of the land, where the rocks are dark, watching at the king's command without ceasing for the ship's return. It was night, but there was a bright moon. They descried ships far off, and they seemed to be sailing west at a speed greater than a storm, though there was little wind. Suddenly the sea became unquiet. It rose until it became like a mountain, and it rolled upon the land. The ships were lifted up and cast far inland, and lay in the fields. Upon that ship which was cast highest and stood dry upon a hill, there was a man, or one in man's shape, but greater than any even of the race of Numenor in stature. He stood upon the rock, and said, This is done as a sign of power, for I am Sauron the mighty, servant of the strong. Wherein he spoke darkly, I have come. Be glad, men of Numenor, for I will take thy king to be my king, and the world shall be given into his hand. And it seemed to men that Sauron was great, and though they feared the light of his eyes, to many he appeared fair, to others terrible, but to some evil. But they led him to the king, and he was humble before Tarkalion. And behold what hath happened since, step by step. At first he revealed only secrets of craft, and taught the making of many things powerful and wonderful, and they seemed good. Our ships go now without the wind, and many are made of metal that sheareth hidden rocks, and they sink not in calm or storm, but they are no longer fair to look upon. Our towers grow ever stronger and climb ever higher, but beauty they leave behind upon earth. We who have no foes are embattled with impregnable fortresses, and mostly on the west. Our arms are multiplied as if for an age-long war, and men are ceasing to give love or care to the making of other things for use or delight. But our shields are impenetrable, our swords cannot be withstood, our darts are like thunder and pass over leagues unerring. Where are our enemies? We have begun to slay one another, for Numenor now seems narrow, that was so large. Men covet, therefore, the lands that other families have long possessed. They fret as men in chains. Wherefore Sauron hath preached deliverance, he hath bidden our king to stretch forth his hand to empire. Yesterday it was over the east, tomorrow it will be over the west. We had no temples, but now the mountain is despoiled. Its trees are felled, and it stands naked, and upon its summit there is a temple. It is of marble, and of gold, and of glass and steel, and is wonderful but terrible. No man prayeth there, it waiteth. For long Sauron did not name his master by the name that from old is accursed here. He spoke at first of the strong one, of the eldest power, of the master. But now he speaketh openly of Alcar of Morgoth. He hath prophesied his return. The temple is to be his house. Numenor is to be the seat of the world's dominion. Meanwhile Sauron dwelleth there. He surveys our land from the mountain and is risen above the king, even proud Tarkalion, of the line chosen by the lords, the seed of Arendelle. Yet Morgoth cometh not, but his shadow hath come. It lieth upon the hearts and minds of men. It is between them and the sun, and all that is beneath it. Is there a shadow? Said Arendelle. I have not seen it, but I have heard others speak of it, and they say it is a shadow of death. But Sauron did not bring that. He promised that he will save us from it. There is a shadow, but it is a shadow of the fear of death and the shadow of greed. But there's also a shadow of darker evil. We no longer see our king. His displeasure falleth on men, and they go out. They are in the evening, and in the morning they are not. The open is insecure, walls are dangerous. Even by the heart of the house spies may sit. And there are prisons and chambers underground. There are torments, and there are evil rites. The woods at night once were fair. Men would roam and sleep there for delight, when thou wert a babe, are filled now with horror. Even our gardens are not wholly clean, after the sun has fallen. And now even by day smoke riseth from the temple. Flowers and grass are withered where it fall. The old songs are forgotten or altered, twisted into other meanings. Yeah, that one learneth day by day, said Arendelle. But some of the new songs are strong and heartening. Yet now I hear that some counsel us to abandon the old tongue. They say we shall leave Erissean and revive the ancestral speech of men. Sauron teacheth it. In this at least I think he doth not well. Sauron deceiveth us doubly. For men learn speech of the firstborn, and therefore if we should verily go back to the beginnings, we should find not the broken dialects of the wild men, nor the simple speech of our fathers, but the tongue of the firstborn. But the Erissean is of all the tongues of the firstborn affairs, and they use it and converse with the lords, and it linketh their very kindreds one to another, and them to us. If we forsake it, we should be sundered from them, and be impoverished. Doubtless that is what he intendeth, but there is no end to his malice. Listen now, Arendelle, and mark well. The time is nigh when all this evil shall bear bitter fruit, if it be not cut down. Shall we wait until the fruit be ripe, or hew the tree and cast it into the fire? Arendelle got suddenly to his feet and went to the window. It is cold, father, he said, and the moon is gone. I trust the garden is empty. The trees grow too near the house. He drew a heavy embroidered cloth across the window and then returned, crouching by the fire as if smitten by a sudden chill. Elendil leaned forward in his chair and continued in a lowered voice. The king and queen grow old, though all know it not, for they are seldom seen. They ask, where is the undying life that Sauron promised them if they would build a temple for Morgoth? The temple is built, but they are grown old. But Sauron foresaw this, and I hear already the whispers gone forth, that he declared that Morgoth's bounty is restrained by the lords and cannot be fulfilled while they barred away. To win life, Tarkalion must win the west. We see now the purpose of the towers and weapons. War is already being talked of, though they do not name the enemy. But I tell thee, it is known to many that the war will go west to Erisea and beyond. Dost thou perceive the extremity of our peril and the madness of the king? Yet this doom draws swiftly near. Our ships are recalled from the corners of the earth. Hast thou not marked and wondered that so many are absent, especially of the younger folk, and in the south and west of our land both works and pastimes languish? In a secret haven to the north there is a building and forging that hath been reported to me by trusty messengers. Reported to thee? What dost thou mean, father? Asked Arendelle as if in fear. Even what I say. Why dost thou look on me so strangely? Didst thou think the son of Elendil, chief of the wise men of Numenor, would be deceived by the lies of a servant of Morgoth? I will not break faith with the king, nor do I purpose anything to his hurt. the house of Arendelle hath my allegiance while I live. But if I must choose between Sauron and Manwë, then all else must come after. I will not bow unto Sauron, nor to his master. But thou speakest as if thou wert a leader in this matter. Woe is me, for I love thee, and thou swearest allegiance. It will not save thee from the peril of treason. Even to dispraise Sauron is held rebellious. I am a leader, my son, and I have counted the peril both for myself and for thee and all whom I love. I do what is right and my right to do, but I cannot conceal it longer from thee. Thou must choose between thy father and Sauron, but I give thee freedom of choice and lay on thee no obedience as to a father. If I have not convinced thy mind and heart, thou shalt be free to stay or go, yea, even to report as may seem good to thee all that I have said. But if thou stayest and learnest more, which will involve closer counsels and other names than mine, then thou wilt be bound in honor to hold thy peace, come what may. Wilt thou stay? Atrenia Timalani, said Herendil suddenly, and clasping his father's knees, he laid his head there and wept. It is an evil hour that putteth such a choice on thee, said his father, laying a hand on his head. But fate calleth some to be men betimes. What dost thou say? I stay, father. Christopher Tolkien notes, the narrative ends here. There is no reason to think that any more was ever written. The manuscript, which becomes increasingly rapid towards the end, peters out in a scrawl. He then continues with his appraisal of what, at the time, were his father's plans for continuing the story. There are several pages of notes that give some idea of my father's thoughts at a certain stage for the continuation of the story beyond the point where he abandoned it. These are in places quite illegible, and in any case where the concomitant of rapidly changing ideas, they are the vestiges of thoughts, not statements of formulated conceptions. More important, some, at least, of these notes clearly preceded the actual narrative that was written and were taken up into it or replaced by something different, and it may very well be that this is true of them all, even those that refer to the latter part of the story which was never written. But they make it very clear that my father was concerned above all with the relation between the father and the son, which was cardinal. In Numenor, he had engendered a situation in which there is the potentiality of anguishing conflict between them, totally incommensurate with the quiet harmony in which the Eorls began or ended. The Eorl family, ancestors, and descendants are the central protagonists in the intended narrative in The Lost Road. The relationship of Elendil and Herendil was subjected to a profound menace. This conflict could have many narrative issues within the framework of the known event, the attack on Valinor and the downfall of Numenor, and in these notes my father was merely sketching out some solutions, none of which did he develop or return to again. An apparently minor question was the words, the Eagles of the Lords of the West. What did they mean, and how were they placed within the story? It seemed that he was as puzzled by then as was Allboyne Eorl when he used them. Road, page 3847. He queries whether Lord of the West means the King of Numenor or Manwë, or whether it is the title properly of Manwë but taken in his, despite by the king, and concludes probably the latter. There follows a scenario in which Scarantor, King of Eagles, is sent by Manwë, and Sarantor, flying against the sun, casts a great shadow on the ground. It was then that Elendil spoke the phrase, but he was overheard, informed upon, and taken before Tarkalion, who declared that the title was his. In the story as actually written, Elendil speaks the words to Herendil, Road, page 62, this volume, page 237. When he sees clouds rising out of the west in the evening sky and stretching out great wings, the same spectacle as made Allboyne Eorl utter them and the men of Numenor in the Akallabeth, page 277, this volume, page 185, and Herendil replies that the title has been decreed to belong to the king. The outcome of Elendil's arrest is not made clear in the notes, but it is said that Herendil was given command of one of the ships, that Elendil himself joined in the great expedition because he followed Herendil, that when they reached Valinor, Tarkalion set Elendil as a hostage in his son's ship, and that when they landed on the shores, Herendil was struck down. Elendil rescued him and set him on shipboard, and pursued by the bolts of Tarkalion, they sailed back east. As they approach Numenor, the world bends, they see the land slipping towards them, and Elendil falls into the deep and is drowned. Asterisk. It would be interesting to note if a tantalizingly obscure note scribbled down in isolation refers to this dimly glimpsed story. If either fails, the other they perish and do not return. Thus, at the last moment, Elendil must prevail on Herendil to hold back, otherwise they would have perished. At that moment, he sees himself as Allboyne and realizes that Elendil and Herendil had perished. And asterisk. This group of notes ends with references to the coming of the Numenorians to Middle-earth and to the later stories, the flying ships, the painted caves, how Elfred walked on a straight road. Other notes refer to plans laid by the Anti-Saurians for an assault on the temple, plans betrayed by Herendil on condition that Elendil is spared. The assault is defeated and Elendil captured. Either associated with this or distinct from it is a suggestion that Herendil is arrested and imprisoned in the dungeons of Sauron, and that Elendil renounces the gods to save his son. My guess is that all this had been rejected when the actual narrative was written, and that the words of Herendil that conclude it show that my father had then in mind some quite distinct solution, in which Elendil and his son remained united in the face of whatever events overtook them. Asterisk. I have suggested Road, page 31, that since Elendil of Numenor appears in FN2, 14 Road, page 28, as king in Beleriand, he must have been among those who took no part in the expedition of Tarkalion, but sat in their ships upon the east coast of the land, FN9 Road, pages 27 to 28, and asterisk. In the early narratives, there is no indication of the duration of the realm of Numenor from its foundation to its ruin, and there is only one named king. In his conversation with Herendil, Elendil attributes all the evils that have befallen to the coming of Sauron. They have arisen, therefore, in a quite brief time, 44 years, page 242, whereas in the Akallabeth, when the great extension of Numenorian history had taken place, those evils began long before and are indeed traced back as far as the 12th ruler, Tar-Kiryatong, the shipbuilder who took the scepter nearly a millennium and a half before the downfall. Akallabeth, page 265, Unfinished Tales, page 221, this volume, page 146. From Elendil's words at the end of the Lost Road, there emerges a sinister picture, the withdrawal of the besotted and aging king from the public view, the unexplained disappearance of people unpopular with the government, informers, prisons, torture, secrecy, fear of the night, propaganda, in the form of the rewriting of history as exemplified by Herendil's words concerning what was now said about Eärendil, page 235, the multiplication of weapons of war, the purpose of which is concealed but guessed at, and behind all the dreadful figure of Sauron, the real power surveying the whole land from the mountain of Numenor. The teaching of Sauron has led to the invention of ships of metal that traverse the seas without sails, but which are hideous in the eyes of those who have not abandoned or forgotten Tol Eressëa, to the building of grim fortresses and unlovely towers, and to missiles that pass with a noise like thunder to strike their targets many miles away. Moreover, Numenor is seen by the young as overpopulous, boring, overknown. Every tree and grass blade is counted, in Herendil's words, and in this cause of discontent is used, it seems, by Sauron to further the policy of imperial expansion and ambition that he presses on the king. When at this time my father reached back to the world, the first man to bear the name Elfred, he found there an image of what he most condemned and feared in his own.